And that's the chapter we're in now. So I don't know where the future chapters will take us, but I like to try and enjoy and appreciate being in the chapter we're in now.
Díomh agus fáilte arás. You're all very welcome to another episode of Irish in Toronto. Today I'll be speaking with Seána Glennon. Seána loves Toronto so much, she didn't move here just once, but twice. Seána and her husband Jonny first began calling Toronto their home in 2018, before heading back to Dublin to allow Seána to complete her PhD. They arrived back to Toronto in 2021 and have been putting down roots here ever since. They are both fantastic volunteers and can be seen at any Irish-related event around the city. In this chat, we discuss the meaning of home, and Seána has a lovely understanding of a concept which can be quite confusing for a lot of emigrants. We also discuss living in the east end of Toronto, as well as Seána's fear of driving in the city. We finished the chat discussing parenting in a different country. Seána and Jonny are raising 2 boys in Toronto, Naoise and Óisín. I admire Seána's honesty and positive outlook throughout this chat. I would still encourage people to download the episodes and to share them with friends and family. Downloads are the easiest indicator for me to gauge how many people I am reaching with these conversations, so I would really appreciate it. I begin our chat by asking Seána about when she first moved to Toronto.
We moved to Toronto not once but twice, so it's kind of a winding story. Back in 2018, I was working as a solicitor in Dublin. My husband Jonny, whom you know as well, was working as well. He works in financial services. And we had always thought that it would be cool to just go away and have an adventure, live somewhere else and see what it would be like. We'd visited Canada before. We have good friends that live here in Toronto. They live out in the beaches. We'd come over for their wedding before and we'd been for another couple of trips, and we'd taken one trip with them up to Algonquin where they had a cottage, and it was so stunning. And I remember sitting out on the dock one evening drinking tea, because we brought the tea with us, and I can't remember if it was Jonny or me. One of us said, God, I'd live here. And then the other one said, God, so would I. So we thought to ourselves, okay, why don't we see if we can make this work? So we decided then that we would make a go of it. Jonny was able to organise a transfer through work to move to Toronto, which was nice. It could have been anywhere in North America, but we decided Toronto would be the place to go. I decided at that time to make a transition from legal practice into academia. So I applied to U of T, where we're sitting as we chat, to do my master's at the law faculty, and got accepted for that. So summer of 2018, we came over. I was not prepared for the heat. It was absolutely boiling. And I know every summer is quite hot here, but I thought that summer was particularly hot. And I headed off then that September to U of T, did my master's, absolutely loved it. And decided in the middle of that, I started to become really interested in questions around democracy and how ordinary people can feed into a democracy and help make big political decisions. And I decided to do a PhD. So that brought us back to Ireland, back to Dublin. I did my PhD at the Centre for Constitutional Studies.
You have to convincing Jonny to go to North America and then pulling him back.
Yeah, well, the story's not over yet. So we headed back for the sake of this PhD that I wanted to do. We got back to Ireland in January of 2020. The pandemic hit. So we were in our apartment in Dublin. And I should have added, the first time around we also adopted a dog, so the dog could come back with us as well. So the 3 of us are back in Dublin. And I was doing my PhD, really enjoying it. It was all great. Then we had our first child, our little guy, Naoise. And then Jonny, lo and behold, got a work opportunity to come back to North America, to come back to Toronto. So at this point, we said, okay, I said, as long as I can make my PhD work, let's go for it. So this time we headed Dublin to Toronto again. This time we had a 6-month-old baby and the dog and another dog that we had appropriated in tow. So the whole menagerie came back to Toronto, moved back here, and that was in 2021, and we have been here ever since, and we're in 2026 now. So I managed to finish my PhD. Got a job at the University of Ottawa as a postdoc, and I've been doing that ever since. And then we had our second son just a few months ago, back in October. So he's the Canadian, we call him. So he is just 5 months old now. And yeah, we're back now and started to put down roots.
Put down roots. So this is...
Yeah, well, you know, it's all very exciting to move back and forth, but it's also a big administrative hassle. And yeah, I think we're here now. We've bought a house. We have our 2 little guys. The aforementioned poor 2 elderly dogs have passed away, but we've adopted a new dog. So we have a Canadian dog, Canadian children.
2 Canadians.
We have 2 Canadians technically. Our little guy has started school. He's in junior kindergarten now. And we're both, I'm on maternity leave now, but enjoying my job, and Johnny's enjoying his job. And it's funny, you know, just, you know, before we started, when we're having a chat about coming here and coming back, and it's the big question, isn't it, when you come, you know, at being Irish and you go somewhere else, and the first thing people say is, are you going to come home? And I think that's such an interesting question, because I think of life really as not a series of permanent decisions, but more in terms of chapters. And I really see our chapter now as being here in Canada, just at the stage of raising our family and starting to settle into, you know, proper adult life. And that's the chapter we're in now. So I don't know where the future chapters will take us, but I like to try and enjoy and appreciate being in the chapter we're in now.
That's the best sentence I've heard all day. I like that, personally as well, myself, obviously. That's very interesting. I think the first couple of years, or the first 2 years maybe, people come here, especially if you're on a temporary work visa. And I don't know if you were on temporary work visas when you first came.
We were on work permits, yeah. We were on work permits then, and we could have applied for permanent residency then, but we actually ended up going back. Since we've been back the second time, we've applied for permanent residency, so we do have that now.
Okay. I'm thinking that first period when you're on that temporary visa, questions about, you know, what will you do afterwards, will you go home? There's a certain time period after you stay, people stop asking those questions, I found anyway, where it's kind of accepted that you, maybe this is just your medium-term home or your long-term home. But I like that, even though you use the phrase putting down roots, which immediately the kind of traditional Irish person in me kicks in and says, oh, you're here forever. So that's what I was thinking in my head, but that's not what you mean.
No, it's not. And I find we all have a tendency to do this, and I do this too, where each decision is forever. And what you decide today is what is going to be in store for you forever. And I think perhaps part of it is becoming a parent. I think about the whole stretch of life a little bit differently. I think about how different I am now to the first time that I was here. You know, it was just the 2 of us. We acquired the dog, but, you know, we were fairly free and easy in how we did it. And now we have children, and it's not good or bad, it's just a little bit different. So you're responsible for other people and you're making decisions for other people. But I would never say, you know, I would never make a definitive statement and say, I'm here forever, or we're moving home, or we're doing this for a certain set time. Because I think in some ways that limits you a little bit from being fully in the now and where you are. If you're always looking ahead and you're thinking, well, I'll do this for a set period and then we're going to go here. So I think it might maybe hold you back a little bit from enjoying where you are and making those relationships and those friendships and, you know, kind of going along on your journey if you're always looking ahead to where you'll go. So I can't answer that question, you know, where will we end up going? Where will we be? For now, we're really happy here. Like, it's such a fantastic city. It's so big. There are people from all corners of the earth. It's so different to home, but in a good way. You know, home is there, and I think my idea of home has probably also evolved a little bit. I don't see home anymore as being one place. I see home as being where I'm with my family. And this is where we are now. So, you know, there's more than one place you can call home.
I like that. Where did you grow up, out of curiosity?
I'm from Longford. So if I'm thinking about my life in chapters, my first chapter is Longford, Edgestown, Mahastrim. So that's where I grew up. I grew up on a dairy farm. My dad's a farmer. And went to school and secondary school in Longford town. Then I went to university in Dublin, went to Trinity. And that was really the second, I suppose, life chapter. From age 17 onwards, I was in Dublin up until I was 30. And that's where I went to university. I made my closest friends, met my husband, and then, started off on a very intense career trajectory. I did my traineeship and worked as a solicitor. So I spent most of my 20s running around the forecourts, running in and out to meetings, working late, and it was great, and it was really formative. And by the time then, the natural sort of transition, when we decided to make the move to Canada, that was a natural time to stop and reflect and say, okay, what am I doing with my life? Maybe I should try and do something different. And it coincided, I think, with a time that there was some very exciting things happening at home. 2018, we had our repeal referendum, you'll remember. And it wasn't just that, and for any listeners that are not familiar with that, that was a constitutional referendum that we had about taking out this constitutional bar to abortion. But there were a lot of conversations happening around then about how do we make these big collective decisions as a society? What do we want our constitution to say? Who are we as a people? What are our values? And I thought all of those conversations were so interesting. I think that's what inspired me to take an academic path after that. So, it probably, I'm not sure that I would have actually quit, a good solicitor job in Dublin and headed off down to Trinity and done my master's there and thought about those questions. But the fact that we had this opportunity to move somewhere brand new, this huge city with millions of people, as many people as are in the whole island of Ireland, and that was a real opportunity to say, maybe I'll just take my foot off the gas here and try out something different. And I think moving away gives you the freedom to do that.
That's great. The initial conversation at the cottage, that cottage weekend is kind of quite typical of a person coming to Toronto and their summer experience, but it is different to the city. We don't spend most of our weekends in the cottage, particularly immigrants, because we don't own cottages when we first come here. What have you, because you lived in Dublin, I understand Dublin's a different city, what have you taken from living in Canada, I suppose, as opposed to living in downtown Toronto?
There is a real shared culture, I think, in Ireland. It's a small place. You only have to be talking to someone in Ireland for a couple of minutes before you make a few connections. You know people in common, you've been to the same places, you've gone to school or university, or you worked somewhere, someone knows someone. And there is that sort of shared connection where you don't have to explain yourself too much. You can kind of figure each other out very quickly from a conversation. And it's so different here. You come here as one person in a few million people. And you do have to do that little bit of explaining. And in some ways, that can feel very anonymous. You can feel, God, am I in danger of coming to this huge city and disappearing? In other ways, it's very freeing. But there are very small cultural differences as well. And I'll tell you a story that I just thought of as we're sitting in U of T. When I came to do my master's, I was sitting in the law faculty with one of my friends, and we were sitting in one of the common rooms at this big empty room, and we were just having a chat. And this guy walked in, and he kind of glanced over at us. And I said, how's it going? And he said, oh, hello. And then he pottered around and then left. And my friend said, do you know him? And I said, no. And she said, why'd you say hello to him then? I was like, what? It's such an Irish thing. Like, I couldn't not acknowledge someone and say hello to them. But, it's a little bit different when you're, in a big, huge city like this. So there's differences for sure. I think sometimes when Irish people come over, they can find it a little bit intimidating. I don't know if you find that from, if you found it yourself, or if you find, people that you chat to that come over as newcomers. You can be lulled into thinking that Canada's the same, because we speak the same language, and, for me, like, it's a common law country, how different can it be? But it is different. It is that little bit kind of culturally different. So you have to navigate that as you go, I think.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You were saying people who maybe struggle when they first come over, like you moving from the dairy farm to Dublin is arguably was as big a change possibly as coming from Dublin to here, in a way as well. So you've already maybe been through it a little bit. I know that's some people might laugh at that because it's still in Ireland, but it's a big change.
Oh, Pat, that was the biggest change of my whole life. And I remember so clearly doing my Leaving Cert. And to me, the Leaving Cert, this is the state exam that you do at the end of school, and it determines where you get into university. And this was like the biggest deal in the world to me. So I studied so hard for my Leaving Cert. And then I just wanted to get the points to do law. And then I got the points to do law. And then all of a sudden I was at 17 on the train up to Dublin. I think I'd been to Dublin I'm not joking, about twice in my whole life before that. I remember going in the first day and I was standing on O'Connell Street, and this old lady was walking past, and I was like, I'm sorry, where's Trinity? And she started laughing, and she was like, it's it's over there. And that was a massive shock for me. Being in a huge city, and everything, it's a big shock, I think, for anyone going to university. I mean, you work here in a university. It's very hard for the undergrads, when they start off. But yeah, I think you're right. To me, that was the biggest and one of the best transitions. But no transition in life is easy, because if it was easy, it wouldn't be a transition. And you have to be prepared to be a bit lonely and a bit discombobulated and a bit confused, and just have a bit of faith that it'll all work out. And I suppose the fact that Jonny and I were together making the move to Toronto made it a little bit easier. But even having said that, I mean, I remember when we first got here that summer in 2018, I was discovering that, not unlike at home, you can't just step out on the road and cross the road and the cars will slow down and wave at you and you'll cross over. The cars will mow you down if you step out. And I kept looking the wrong direction because the cars were coming from the opposite way. And I remember bursting into tears in a coffee shop out at the beaches, being like, I can't even cross the road. How am I going to make a life for myself here, and I can't even cross the road? So you have to have that moment of bursting out crying in the coffee shop, I think, before you can, get your teeth into it.
Yeah, that's understandable. I've had a good few frustrating moments myself where I think it wouldn't be fucking like this in Ireland, we'd have it sorted as if we're the most perfect country in the world.
I know, you do. And it's funny because when we talk about home, I use the word home in several different ways. Like home is Longford, and that's where I'm from. But I did spend about half of my life in Dublin, and that was home then. And now we're here in Toronto, and, we're here with our family, and this is home now. And to me, Ireland I don't think of Ireland as a place that I left behind. I think of it as a place that I bring with me. It's central to who I am, how I am in the world, how I relate to other people, how I make decisions, and how I make relationships and friendships, and how I go about things. So to me, I almost feel closer to my Irish identity being away. And part of that is from some of the, community and charitable organisations that I'm involved with over here, and the fantastic Irish community that there is over here. But in many ways, I don't have that experience that some people talk about of feeling rootless. I still feel very much rooted and secure in my Irish identity, but just doing it somewhere else, which is a cool thing to do and a cool thing to be able to experience, I think.
I feel very much like that. You're heavily involved in the Irish community. I met you at many events my first year here. You seem to be here, there and everywhere, yourself and Johnny. Would that have been something that would have come natural to the two of you at home? Or is it something you kind of took on over here that, okay, we need to push ourselves a little bit and get out of our own comfort zones?
I don't think that and probably work was the excuse, but I think in Dublin, because work took up so much of my time and resources, I would not have been massively involved in the community. And even when I was here when we were here the first time in 2018 and I was busy studying, I didn't have any Irish friends. I made a bunch of friends here at U of T. We were from all different corners of the world. My friends were all either Canadian or other newcomers. And I actually was barely even aware that there was such a fantastic Irish community here. And it's been the second time around that I've become really involved. I think I started off with the Ireland Funds, which Etna Heffernan introduced me to. And at that time, the Ireland Funds was just kicking off post-COVID the annual St. Patrick's Day luncheon, which you know and you've been to, which raises money for fantastic causes. And I started getting involved in that, and there was a fantastic network of us organising that lunch, and that really opened my eyes to the community that's here. And then since then, being involved with organisations like ICANN, which really has a special place in my heart because it does so much for Irish newcomers coming over here, because you know, there's especially younger Irish people coming over have so much to offer, and you just need to get that little bit of guidance as to how things work over here. And ICANN does great work on that. And there's a fantastic team there, and there's a fantastic community. And I think for a very small country, we actually punch very much above our weight in terms of our visibility. The fact that we have Irish Heritage Month for the whole month of March.
We get to take over the country for a month.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, it's not just St. Patrick's Day, it's our whole month that Jamie Maloney succeeded in getting across the line. So, you know, for a very small country, we have a big impact, and there's so many people here that, you know, I find Canadians sometimes are often reaching for identity, and there's so many people that, you know, can identify as being Irish, which I just think is so fantastic. So to answer your question, I don't even find it to be out of the comfort zone. I find that, you know, I've had so much help and guidance myself as I've come over here. I think it's kind of incumbent on all of us, and I know you do so much of this as well, to try and pay it forward a little bit and to try and sort of smooth the path for other people that are coming over as well. So it's one of the things that I enjoy most in my life here, is being involved in the Irish community, because, you know, you get to meet so many fantastic people and get involved in so many fantastic projects.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's been one of the best things about my life over here. I never wanted to escape that identity at home either, but I do think it kind of grows stronger. But I thought it would add to my life as well in a selfish way. But, you know, by paying it forward, you know, there's no such thing as a selfless good deed or whatever it is. I'm curious about logistically. Have you always lived in the East End, in the beaches?
We have. So bizarrely, when we came here in 2018, we decided to live in the East End because our friends, our aforementioned good friends, lived in the East End. So we had visited the beaches before, and what I really liked about it was, when you think of Toronto, you think of this big sprawling metropolis, or this huge city, but actually it's more of a city of neighbourhoods, isn't it? And each neighbourhood has its own kind of distinct identity. And I like the beaches because, you know, you obviously have the beaches, the controversy over whether it's called the beach or the beaches or just beaches, which I don't feel qualified to weigh into. But, you know, you have the beach there, you have the lake, it's so beautiful, and you can create a really nice 15-minute city. You can find, you know, a lot of things, and you can hop on the train and come downtown anytime you want. But we moved into a house and we just rented when we came here in 2018, and we had like a lovely little house in the beaches, and then we went back home, and then we were returning to Toronto again for take two. We contacted our landlord and said, we're coming back, you know, can we just get a reference from you? Because we had heard the rental market was kind of a bloodbath, much as it is in Dublin. And she said, as it happens, the tenants in the house are moving out. Would you move back in? So we found ourselves back in the same house again. Wow. So we had a very happy another couple of years there until we eventually decided to buy. But yeah, we ended up there, and I know there will be people will always have a ferocious debate over whether the East or the West Ends are superior. I'm a big fan of the East End, and there's a lot of Irish people in the East End too.
I've noticed that.
You know, yeah.
I think the longer, sorry to interject, but I think the longer you live here, maybe this is just because I lived in the West End the first year I lived here. I live kind of more central now. The longer you live here, you get to appreciate the East End. I think for me, I know you live there straight away, but I spent a lot of time, you know, around Christie Pitts and this thing. Yeah. I was like, oh, the West End has everything. And I had this stereotype of the East End as being run down and forgotten about. Now I go to the East End quite regularly because I suppose I appreciated something that was always there. I just didn't want to open my eyes and see it. And for me, it's the community.
Yeah.
And not that the community doesn't exist in the West End, but just the real sense, and obviously the beauty of the fact that the beach is right there and all that type of thing. But you know, I just like the community. I like the fact that it's very residential. There's obviously a limit on condo buildings that can be built there, it seems, but just great community.
Well, I mean, ironically, like for all my talk of how Dublin is so small, when we lived in Dublin, we lived in an apartment, and I don't think I knew anybody else in the apartment building. And then when we moved to Toronto, we very quickly got to know our neighbours, and we had fantastic neighbours that would help us with walking the dog. And like our neighbour came in one day when I set off the carbon monoxide alarm and I couldn't turn it off, and fixed it. And you know, our neighbours both had keys to our house to come in and, you know, do anything that we needed them to do. And funnily enough, since we've purchased our house now, we've moved to a different street. We're still in the same neighbourhood. We're about 3 streets over. Wow. But it felt like, oh wow, we're going to a really different place. And I kept on I mentioned to a couple of people, oh, we're moving to this street. And a couple of separate people said to me, oh, there's another Irish family living on that street. And I was like, oh, right, I'll look out for them. And then I mentioned it to someone else, and they're like, there's Irish people on that street. And I was like, oh, right, cool. So then we were moving in, and Johnny's getting something out of the car into the new house. And across the street, someone pops out and we're like, are you the Irish people? We were like, yeah, that's us. And we were like, oh, we heard about you. And they popped over, their two young lads popped over with a lovely box of Irish tea and goodies. So actually, it is the West End is probably cooler, but I am at a stage in my life now where I don't care about being cool. The East End is so much fun. There's so much community. It's really nice. And honestly, I go out and walk the dog. I shouldn't say this, and I don't lock the door behind me. Like it's a very safe community, and it's really nice. So, that's kind of the priority now. I hope I'm selling the East End.
I don't think people. I think the stereotype is used from people who don't go there, too often. So I would run there a lot intentionally because it's so residential, and it feels more normal, I suppose, than the where I live is. I love where I live, practically, but actually day to day living, and it's an apartment building and all that type of thing. I think where you guys live is much more probably an ideal situation, close to downtown, but feels more like a small town or a village.
It does. It really feels like a neighbourhood, and it really has that 15-minute city kind of feel where I think, you can set your life up in such a way that, like, the school and the doctor and the dentist and the gym and a lot of it, it's really well served. So you can do a lot of what you need on foot from your house, which was, which is not quite the experience in Dublin. Things, it's harder probably to get by without a car in Dublin. I know everyone gives out about the subway here, but I just think the subway, coming from a city that did not have a subway, I think the subway is amazing for getting around, and the GO train and everything. So it is pretty well served. You can do well without a car if you don't want to drive, which I didn't want to drive for a long time, but I did. I've faced up to finally figured out what side of the road I'm supposed to be on and have started driving. So, that was my other Everest that I've managed to get over here.
You can train to be a solicitor, work in the forecourts, get a PhD, but you struggle with the fear of driving.
I think I've just coined this term as spatial derangement, where I can't tell what distance one thing is from something else, which completely inhibits me from being able to park a car. But over the course of the last few months, and this is another thing that having children does to you, I thought to myself, if Johnny is away and there's an emergency and I need to get somewhere, I need to be able to drive the car. So I just made myself start driving the car. So I do drive the car now. Not well, but I drive it.
Did you drive here today?
I didn't. I got the subway here today. Are you mad trying to park downtown? No, I can drive around the neighbourhood. I can drive to the nearest emergency room. So that's all I need to do. That's all I need to do. Yeah, definitely got the subway here today.
Having children here, so one was born in Ireland, but the Canadian is born here, but they're both going to be Canadian kids.
They will both be Canadian kids, and it hits me every now and then. So they both have Irish names for a start, Naoise and Óisín. So when we go to the doctor, when I was bringing the baby to the doctor and they called out Seána and Óisín, I'm like, that's us. So they'll have to live with that. But it hits me sometimes that they are Canadian kids. It was a little while ago where the 4-year-old Naoise wanted a peanut butter and jam sandwich, and Johnny was going to make it for him, and then he looked and was like, do you know what, I've no jam, you'll just have to have a peanut butter sandwich. And Naoise goes, but Dad, can't you go to the store and get some jelly? Ooh. And I was like, are you asking me to go to the shop to get jam? And we just laughed and made fun of him, the poor little guy, and he was like, what's so funny? But
he'll be making fun of your accent soon enough.
He does. He makes fun of my accent, and he also has a Canadian accent, but also comes out with some clangers of phrases. So the other day he called the baby me brother. So I don't know what sort of accent either of them are going to have. But again, I think one of the things that pulls people about going home is the question of having children and where do I want to, have my children. But I think you can go home whenever you want, but home won't be the same and you're not the same, and your kids' lives are not going to be the same as your life no matter where you are. There's a whole set of new challenges and opportunities that your kids are going to grapple with. So I think the best thing you can do is just arm yourself with the best information that you have and go with creating your home wherever you are. So I probably have to get my head around that I will have, depending on how long we're here, but I will likely have Canadian children in Canadian school. But they're still going to be Irish too, and they can't get away from that with names like Naoise and Óisín. But yeah, I think that's just something that we're going to have to figure out as we go along.
The question that gets asked all the time, and I'm sure you've heard this 100 times, if people have the courage to say it to your face, but how can you have kids when all the grandparents live at home? You've no support. You won't be able to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is a good question. So
there'll be parents listening who this will blow their minds, that you live with your husband here.
Absolutely.
And you have, in quotation marks, no support here.
Yeah, but the funny thing about that is, so at home, if we were to have kids at home, so funnily enough, one thing that Jonny and I have in common is that both of our mums passed away, both within a year of each other, actually, quite a long time ago, quite a number of years ago. So we both kind of had that experience at the same time, and we both still have our dads, which is fantastic. But coming from our families, like my brother, I have two brothers. One lives in America, he lives in New York now. The other is back in Ireland. But since being here in Toronto, we have built up such a lovely network and such a lovely community out on the East End of other Irish parents. So I now have like a fantastic group of other mums that are Irish or have Irish roots as well, that I could call on if I had an emergency. And ironically, it would probably be easier to call on any of them than it would be in Dublin, where, my dad might be down in Longford milking the cows and wouldn't necessarily be able to come. And, the same with my brothers. And, it probably would have been a bit more challenging to be able to manage that. But one of the things that we did when we were moving over here with the 6-month-old was reach out to the Irish in Toronto Facebook group, which is such a valuable resource, and just put a message on that saying, we're moving to Toronto, we have a 6-month-old baby, what do we do for childcare? And who should answer it but Gemma Healy-Murphy, who you've featured on this podcast. And she said, I have a fantastic lady that takes care of my little girl, and I didn't know Gemma at all. And through that, I met Gemma. We found our fantastic childminder who took care of Gemma's kids, Michelle, and she has just been absolutely my rock. She took care of Naoise. She helps me to take care of Óisín as well. She's fantastic. And then met all of these other fantastic parents in the neighbourhood. And our kids, we all have kids roughly the same age who play together, and we go to each other's birthday parties. And I know that if I was stuck, I could message the WhatsApp group and say, could anybody pick up Naoise, or could anybody do anything? And it doesn't happen often, but there is actually that network of people there that can help. So I think that, some people, maybe it might hold them back from, taking an opportunity, but it's relatively easy to move with a baby or very young kids before they start school, especially. It's not a huge deal. You're going to be scrambling looking for childcare and help wherever you are. So I don't think people should necessarily let it hold them back. And I know it's kind of a matter of preference. Some people just have grandparents that live next door and they want that, and that's really important to them. Not everyone has that, and you sort of make your community where you are and try and muddle along and figure it out.
Were you always this positive and always this practical? Not even practical, but this always accept it as it is, move forward. You don't seem to, how do I phrase it? You don't seem to waste time thinking about things that could have happened in the past that you could have changed.
I think part of that is just growing up a bit and getting a bit older. Like, I, for certain, would have agonised over decisions when I was younger and less confident, in a professional setting when you're starting out, and I would have agonised over, writing a letter, or, how to advise a client, or, even, day-to-day life things. And now I think, as I was saying to you earlier, like, I don't see life as being made up of binary correct and incorrect decisions. There are obviously some decisions that clearly are not good, but for the most part, when you're trying to figure out a path forward. There isn't necessarily a right or wrong. There's just, you pick something, you do it, you try not to look back at, oh, I could have done this and I should have done that. That just sucks the joy out of the moment that you're in. So, you know, I could sit here and say, you know, I feel sad that my dad doesn't get to see my two boys on a daily basis. And I have a gorgeous little niece at home that, you know, my dad sees every day. And, you know, my kids don't have that. And, you know, that makes me feel sad, but it also makes it really special when we do get home and we do get to spend time together. And I get to say to my little boys, this is the farm that I grew up on. There's the quad bike where I nearly flipped off 10 times. You know, there are the cows, this is the milking parlour, and these are the new calves that have been born. And I get to see it all through their eyes, which makes it really special. And then they get all of the opportunities of living in a place like this, that all the opportunities that we can offer them. So, no, to answer your question, it's not that I don't reflect on my choices and think they could have been better. I do, and it's not that I don't worry, because I do. I do worry all the time, am I doing the right thing? But at the end of the day, like, I didn't actually realise I was coming across as positive, but yeah, I try not to sweat. I think it's something that comes with age. I try not to sweat the small. Not that, oh my god, I know I'm acting like I'm at 100. But yeah, I definitely feel a little bit more comfortable in myself in my 30s than I did in my 20s, when I was constantly second guessing and worrying about what people thought of me. Don't get me wrong, I care very much what people think of me, but I don't get crippled by it, we'll say, you know.
Okay. Professionally, you mentioned very briefly earlier on that, or casually you mentioned that you have a postdoc in Ottawa. For those listening, Ottawa is 4.5 hours from Toronto. So how does that work? I know you're on maternity leave, but what's the logistics of that?
So this job came about through a conference in Dublin that I met a fantastic professor from the Public Law Centre in Ottawa, who was embarking on a really interesting project on unwritten constitutionalism. I won't get into all of the ins and outs, but basically just how, you know, the different norms, the different constitutional norms, different kinds of rules that aren't necessarily written down, but, you know, how they're applied in practice, which has really come in since we've seen developments in the US and the UK where these different norms can sometimes tend to be flouted. So this professor was doing this really interesting project as I was doing my PhD. So there was a postdoc opportunity there. So I have made it work through a little bit of back and forth. It is a good 4.5 hours, 5.5 hours on the train if it's slow. So I will often travel back and forth between here and Ottawa. You usually get the train. The train isn't so bad. You can sit down and you can set up your laptop and you can work and you can get coffee and
I've done it.
I've
done it, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not so bad. And I can spend a couple of days in Ottawa and then come back here. And because it's a comparative project that we work on, we have colleagues in the UK, we have colleagues in Germany, we have colleagues in different parts of the world. So we're all able to meet virtually anyway. And then I can be in Ottawa in person for various conferences or for what I need to be in. So, you know, it's a little bit of a juggle, you know, with childcare and with Johnny's job, but we've tended to make it work so far. And yeah, being on maternity leave now is nice. It's nice not to do so much travel. I still have managed to sign myself up for various bits and pieces and conferences during my maternity leave, and I thought, oh, I'll just have nothing to do but free time. But yeah, I've managed to make it work so far.
I think you'd make anything work.
Yeah, it's where I feel lucky with Johnny because he travels for work also. So we do a bit of a juggle back and forth. And it just means having the golden rule for us is the family calendar. If it's not in the family calendar, it's not happening. So when I'm trying to figure out my travel, I'll flick into the family calendar, and if it says Johnny's in Florida this week, then I think, okay, I'll have to do it a different week. But if he hasn't put it in the family calendar and I get in first, then I'm away that week. So it's, yeah, we somehow do a juggle and make it work. And as I say, community and childcare is the key to that as well, to be able to do that.
We might leave it there, Seána. That's okay. Thank
you very much. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on, Pat. It's been a pleasure.
Really hope you enjoyed that chat with Seána. Her positive outlook is commendable, and she has certainly helped me out a lot in some personal decisions that I am currently making. Once again, all feedback is welcome. You can email me. My email address is in the description of the podcast, or you can find me on social media. It's always lovely getting messages from strangers and talking about the podcast and their stories of what brought them to Toronto. I would still encourage people to download the episodes and to share them with friends and family. Downloads are the easiest indicator for me to gauge how many people I'm reaching with these conversations, so I would really appreciate it. Thanks to Natalie Barbuzzi, who provided the logo for the podcast, and thanks to Shannon Heaton, who provided the music you are now listening to. You'll find all of her music on Spotify. There'll be another episode of Irish in Toronto in 2 weeks, and until then, slán go fóill.